When you write a cookbook, how do you balance including your personal stories, your recipes, and maybe some uncomfortable, tough love? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for readers, writers, and cooks. I'm Kristin Donnelly, and I'm here with Molly Stevens. Hey, Molly.
Hey, Kristin.
So when you go to the bookstore, you often find this shelf full of Italian cookbooks and maybe French cookbooks. But isn't it weird how there are very few cookbooks from Indigenous American writers?
Right, in the U.S. And I mean, shelves and shelves and shelves of it feels like there's no end to the appetite for Italian, French, and European-based cookbooks. And I feel like it's starting to change, thankfully, but it's, weird is one word to use for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people probably would say it's not weird when you look at the history and the erasure of history that has happened. But yeah, you're right. It is changing. Today, our guest is Sara Calvosa Olson, a Karuk writer who wrote the book Chími Nu'am, Native California Foodways for the Contemporary Kitchen. She has been a food writer for a long time and started writing about Native foodways in the last 5 or so years. But I am curious to hear how this is her first book, so how she got it published and how she approached it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to her. It's a beautiful book.
Welcome to Everything Cookbook, Sara. We're so happy to have you here.
Yotwa, thank you for having me.
Yotwa, what does that mean?
It means thank you in Karuk, but it's kind of even extra fun because when we say thank you, it's more of a yay. So
I love that.
Yotwa means yay, but
That's great.
It's also thank you. You know, that's a way of celebrating our relationship.
It's more meaningful than thank you. I mean, it's wonderful.
I think that's kind of how Indigenous languages are. Our words have, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of context and language development. So one word really has so much context behind it that it can convey a whole lot in just a couple of syllables.
So your book, congratulations, by the way, Chími Nu'am, has an Indigenous title. Can you tell us about it?
I mean, that was actually really something that I thought about a lot. It was a lot of back and forth. In fact, I think the very last thing that we came up with was the title. It was untitled the entire time until the end. And then I was really hesitant and had to do a lot of thought. I wanted to be very intentional about how I use my language in my book and not commodifying it for the novelty of a book being written in an Indigenous language. And I didn't really want to even market it that way as like, this title, it's Karuk. And I didn't want it to be like that. As I wanted it to be more of something that I was sharing and teaching at the same time. So I really went back and forth about whether or not to include that in the title, but I did a lot of research and talking with other tribal members and other Native people in different Native communities in California. And hands down, everybody agreed that they would love to see a California Indian language on a book cover. And so I decided that Let's Eat would be the perfect thing because it's something that we say, I think, across the board that most people and whatever your background, it's time to eat. Parents calling their kids, it's time to eat. Let's eat.
It seems like such a natural and beautiful title for the book that it's funny to hear that you didn't have that idea all along. But let's talk about the genesis of the book. Like, very interested in how it came about and whether you pitched it to Heyday or Heyday found you. Really interested in Heyday in general too.
Oh yeah, actually, Chími Nu'am was the name of the column that I was writing for News from Native California, which is part of Heyday and the Roundhouse Publishing aspect of Heyday. I had been a food writer writing for Edible and just sort of, doing just odd food writing. I'd always been interested in it. So I was doing that for a while and editing, and I felt like it wasn't as fulfilling as I wanted it to be. I wanted to really write from my own perspective through my own lens. And I really love and appreciate how celebratory the Edible magazine tones are. It's really celebratory. And I had a difficult time finding a celebratory tone for some of these interviews because of the issues that I grew up with in my community and being really aware of. I actually ended up going to a rooftop dinner in Berkeley where Crystal Wapipa was cooking, and Brian Yazzie and Vincent and Louis Trevino from the Olone Cafe. They were cooking there, and I went there to cover that for Edible. And I was so moved by the way that they were just putting our foods together in the most beautiful and vibrant ways. And it really resonated with me in the way that I cook at home with my own children. And that was really when I decided to just pivot and only write through the lens that felt like the most truthful to me, and to use it as a way to be in service of my community. So using this outlet as a way to be in service of, sharing my recipes and helping bring our traditional foods into our modern kitchens. So I pitched that to News from Native California. Yeah, that's how I started writing a column.
And News from Native California is published by Heyday?
Yeah, the Roundhouse Publishing arm of Heyday.
Right. And I guess we should explain, if listeners don't know, but Heyday is an independent nonprofit publisher that's been around for about 50 years based in Berkeley.
Yes.
Really interesting group.
It is. It is an interesting group. And I feel really fortunate to work with them because they have really fostered a very unique culture in their publishing house, and with all of the relationship building that their founder did with California Native peoples, and giving us really a platform for a really long time to share our work in our own words. And I just could not be more grateful to work with them there.
How long ago, the dinner you talked about that was with 4 different Indigenous chefs, how long ago was that?
I believe it was in 2018, maybe.
Okay. But at home, you had been cooking with these ingredients for a long time. And I'm curious, did you grow up very close to your Karuk heritage?
So I grew up on Hoopa lands near the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation and on the reservation. And that's a complex question because yes, I did. I grew up with family and proximity, but it's a complicated question because I don't know if anybody can really say that they grew up fully connected, and even when you're living there, because of colonialism and this disconnect that we're all trying to reclaim in some way at all times and always have been. I think that's part of being born Native, is that you are born into activism immediately. You're already thrown into seeing the fights right in front of you, fighting for water, fighting for land, just fighting for your right to exist. So yes, as far as that is what our cultural connection really is right now, is protection, water protection, reclaiming land and stewardship pieces, and trying to gain ground in that way. And also, back then, we were still getting commodity boxes of food. So those government commodities with the government cheese and the peanut butter. And so there was that. And I think this is a really common kind of our food story back then, was the combination of the commodity boxes that we all really still depended on to supplement our traditional foods. Everybody had gardens. There was still hunting and fishing. So it was this blending. And then whatever other cultural connections might have, like my dad is Italian. So that sort of filtered its way into this food story as well.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about balance, because there's a beautiful mix in your voice and in your book of these angry rants about the extractive nature of industrial agriculture, and balance with the hope that you find in your indigenous history. And there's a lot about being an environmental steward, and not just in the introduction of the book, but in the headnotes and the recipes themselves. And that balance, how you found that balance and how you bring joy in telling these stories.
Yeah. How did that come about?
Thank you for that So this book was not intended to be such a personal work. Originally, I had planned to spend more time going out and meeting with other people in different tribal communities in California and talking about their foodways, which is kind of what I had been doing in News from Native California, interviewing people doing food work and writing about them and sharing my own home recipes along with that. So I had intended to expand on that so that that would be more of what the book was about. But then the pandemic happened really right as I was starting to put this book together. So I had to really change because I couldn't go, nobody could travel, and our elders are particularly vulnerable. So there was just no way that that was going to happen. So it ended up being much more personal and more, I guess, more vulnerable. That's how it feels, because it is really from my heart and from my family, 100%. So this is pretty much how I exist in the world as a Native person and as a mom and as a community member. So that was really how it became so personal. And I felt like it would be doing it an injustice if I wasn't really using this as an opportunity to speak out and speak up about these issues, but doing it in a way that's hopefully providing more context for how I came to these fights and to this activism.
So in that change, and it's interesting, I'm just thinking, listening to you, Sara, like if I think about all the conversations we've had with cookbook authors recently, we've heard this story many times that you start out with a proposal because of the timing. We're at 2023 right now. A lot of the books we're talking about were made during the pandemic. So authors will start with a proposal and then pandemic, can't go out, can't meet with other people, the book changes. So we're curious about working with Heyday. Did they have a lot of opinions on how to shape this book, especially considering you had to take this sort of turn in your approach?
Yeah, so they were really, I felt like I really had the space to expand and make this what I wanted. And I was very fortunate that it was very much driven by me in every aspect. So, I mean, on one hand, I have nobody to blame but myself. But on the other hand, at least I know that it is really authentic to my belief system and my work. So they really gave me a lot of leeway, but provided the emotional support, which was really surprising because it is such a vulnerable work. And I am not necessarily an enthusiastic speaker, or I'm not really excited about being perceived at all. So it was really challenging.
You're not alone. You're not alone in that. A lot of writers are that way.
Mm-hmm. But I felt like my editors really helped me fully flesh out this vision that I maybe didn't see, but they could see it already for me and were really supportive of that and always ready to help with a direction if I was not sure where to go. I felt like the feedback was so honest, and we had some incredible conversations. We would have our editorial meetings. One of my editors, Turia, is the editor of News from Native California. She and I would have some really great conversations talking about foodways, and it felt really like just an opportunity, a touchstone opportunity to be in conversation and to really speak out loud what I had been already thinking about and collaborating with her about. There was that aspect, I guess, of the editorial help, but they were very hands off, I think, for the most part, as far as the vision of how this book would come out. I think that they were just really supportive and ready to see what would happen in a really organic, developing kind of way.
Since this is your first book, how did you learn or teach yourself the process of writing a cookbook?
Yeah, that was really hard. You have to have like 20 careers to write one cookbook. And I'm not a chef, so I just cook for my family and community. So that was complicated. I've been a food writer, so I had an idea of how I wanted to go with it as far as context and history. And there was that, but it was challenging to the photography. I have really never used a camera before.
Yeah, you did all the photography.
Yeah, wow.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a challenge. I did a lot of reading and I joined some Facebook groups. I would email people who were food photographers that did food photography that I really liked. And some people, well, I didn't really get a lot of responses back, but the ones I did were really valuable. And I think that this book probably would have been done in half the time if there wasn't such a learning curve for the photography and even recipe development. And developing an efficient process for that was complicated as well, because these ingredients are not the type of things you just go to the store and pick out. So it took a couple of years because I needed at least 2 gathering cycles to really gather enough materials to do enough recipe development to feel comfortable putting it in my book, and to make sure that I'm meticulously documenting every teaspoon and tablespoon, when I really have learned from like the school of grandpa sauce where you just sort of throw it in.
Mm-hmm.
So it was challenging, and developing systems for keeping, I have notebooks that are all covered in jelly and stained and sauce and stuff, full notebooks of recipes as I'm taking notes and stuff. So it was hard because it was a lot of recipes. Mm-hmm. And that once I started writing down and really collaborating with my sons and my husband, like, well, let's talk about this. Like, what are the recipes that you really do like and have liked over the years? And so making sure that I'm including all of those, and then trying to figure out, how do I translate this into something that people would be excited about making in their own kitchen. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, you have these very fleeting ingredients. So I understand, like, if you don't catch the berry this year, you got to wait until next year, unless you're going to use frozen or something dried.
I mean, I think about the complexity of developing recipes, based on supermarket ingredients, and we try to be efficient and, shop. But you're talking about gathered ingredients. And you say right in the introduction, this is a reverse cookbook.
An inconvenient cookbook, admittedly. I love that.
Yeah. No, the humor is, we've been talking about the humor in the book, that like there are more than 3 kinds of meat. You've mastered the understatement, I guess it is. But it's very interesting, the voice, because the voice could have been preachy or ungenerous. And I think that with your humor and your sort of permission and your embrace of imperfection, it's a very welcoming voice.
Like, there's no shame, I'm hoping, in that.
Yeah.
I feel that there's a lot of food shaming that happens a lot.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point.
And it can be divisive. And I don't want to shame people for their food ways or for the way that they're doing things, because nobody right now, they did not create these systems. You didn't create these systems. I didn't create these systems. We're just trying to raise our families to be good. We want to raise our families, our children, or whatever, to be good people. We want to help our communities. And we didn't invent this system. And we are trying our hardest to thrive and survive inside it. So I don't want to shame anybody for what they don't know, because how would people who didn't grow up in community know? There's no education. There's been widespread erasure of Native people and the problems that we face in our communities. So how would anybody know? And I don't want to shame people, but I do think it's an opportunity to bring people up to speed on where we're at. And this is what you may have missed in the last 100 years in California, and like I said, I really don't blame anybody for not knowing, because I grew up on a reservation and there's still no Native history in our textbooks. So I don't want to alienate anybody. In fact, I wanted to do the opposite, where hopefully, because we need everybody to be working together and to be getting on the same page. So it's hard because it can be spicy. I can definitely get a little spicy, but I still at the same time want to engage everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because the recipe is, we talked about these fleeting ingredients, and you use a lot of acorn flour, which can't go to the supermarket and buy, but then you include in your recipes a mix, especially with the baking. It's a lot of acorn flour mixed with other flours. Why do recipes that way?
Because this is meant to be a beginner, entry level, first steps into understanding what it means to decolonize your diet. And that's something I think that's been overused, maybe. And maybe that, I don't know, outside of community, if that's something people who are non-Native hear a lot. But in community, we talk about decolonizing a lot and decolonizing our diets. So I felt like it's impossible to ask people to do it all at once. You just cannot. It is impossible. It would mean that you have a great deal of access and privilege, which is not where I'm trying to go. I think what I'm trying to do, or what I'm hoping to do, is just bring everybody up at the same time and get everybody at least engaged and start accessing these rhythms and start getting outside and just looking at things in a different way. And like I said, our diets have been colonized for quite some time, and commodity foods playing a large part, making up a large kind of cornerstone of a lot of our diets. So how can I engage my community by getting them to start incorporating more traditional foods? And then how can I also bring the broader non-Native community into the picture as well and get them up to speed on these issues, while also acknowledging that everybody wants to be outside. Everybody has this ability to access this relationship, this rhythm, and everybody is a steward. The earth remembers all of us. And I think that starting from a place that isn't so daunting or intimidating is going to help people make more lasting changes and real incorporations into their lives. And dietarily speaking, I mean, 1 cup of acorn flour instead of 1 cup of AP flour. And in our communities where diet-related diseases are rampant, that's still 1 less cup of AP flour that they're eating.
Mm-hmm. You describe it as just north of Betty Crocker, sort of that baby steps, and that I think you say in the introduction, you hope everybody outgrows this book. And again, that goes to this very welcoming, you're like, it's an introduction. And the balance of storytelling too, I think I was so struck by the acorn story that leads, I think it's the winter chapter. And there was a point where it says, don't tell this story if it's not winter, like put a bookmark here. And I felt a little, I don't say guilty, but I was like, but I really want to read it because I'm going to be talking to you. And so, but you talk about how sharing a story connects to food sovereignty and to community. But I also get the sense that you want people to make these recipes too. It's not just a book of stories and recipes that are there sort of performative, but these are, like you said, these are things you make with your family, you feed your family and your friends. And so that selection of recipes that you chose to tell these stories, I mean, you already mentioned it changed a little bit, but we're curious about how you decided what to put in it. And I mean, in the head note to the hand pies, you tell that wonderful story about waking up in the middle of the night and screaming, yelling, hand pies. And I don't think every recipe came to you, in a dream, but
divine inspiration.
It's a challenge every cookbook author faces, especially if you're trying to really tell a story through this book. How do you put together the dishes that will bring people in, teach them something, encourage them to further their journey, especially in something like you're doing here?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Gathering and doing it in a good way and connecting yourself is a lot of work. And there's a lot of non-cooking work involved in that. That's, like I said, it's the worst cookbook in this way. So the worst for this, but it is something where you have to lay the groundwork before you get there. So you go out and you've decided you're starting to understand the rhythm of the oak tree in your yard and whether or not it's having a mast year, dropping more. You're starting to get it. You're gathering, you're going through, you're maybe reaching out and offering what you have to maybe the local tribe and see if there's elders that might need what you have, or you're starting to do the work. You're doing the research, you're learning the stories and the art and the basket weaving and the stewardship pieces and all the things that go with this, what it means to tend this one little relative. So you've gone through all of that, and now you've got this acorn flour So I want to make sure that there's something fun and compelling for you to continuously make with it, and something that is going to engage the rest of your family while getting them used to these different flavors, that earthiness and the bitterness or the fishiness, those types of flavors that, in a little bit of a way, because our palates are so conditioned for super salty and sweet things. So I just don't think anybody's ready for a big bowl of acorn soup just yet. So yeah, it's meant to be ready for when you've gone through all of this work and now you have some fun things to make with your acorn flour.
So you give us whoopie pies.
Yeah, which is hands down my family's favorite.
That's great.
Is that something you made for a long time or that you developed for the book?
In some form or another, yeah. I think the size and the addition of the maple in the filling, which I had some maple sugar from the Passamaquoddy people. So I had put in the maple as a sweetener, and it just was like, it just pulled the whole thing together. And so I made a batch, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, and my family just ate them all immediately. There's no stopping that.
You love everything cookbooks, right? And we love making it for you. If you're ready to take this relationship to the next level, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you'll find links to our new merch, including the coziest t-shirts and sweatshirts, and our bookstore, where we earn commission from every book you buy. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Again, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support to find all the ways to show us love. And thanks for listening. Yeah, I feel like when you were talking about people adapting to the rhythm of, say, their oak tree or something where they live, you're almost picturing your ideal reader. I'm curious how you'd like people who perhaps either don't live in California or who are not native to read this book and interact with it.
Yeah, I would like them to interact with it just in the way that anybody would. And I think that across the board, there's people that are already in tribal community they'll already be ready for this. But there's a lot of catching up to do in the non-native community and understanding how to be in community and what that really means, what relationship means, what reciprocity means. And I'm hoping that non-native people will engage with it and go forward on this journey and just be excited about it as a journey. And in that journey, going through centering an Indigenous lens as they're going forward, which is really, I think, going to be a really interesting exercise anyway, to go forward in this journey, in this one thing, by centering Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledge. And hopefully, my ideal, I guess, non-native reader would see this journey and expand and become part of community and start to develop relationships with community and with other Native people, and find a way to really understand what it means to be in community and to practice reciprocity. So what I mean by that is, for us, when we go out to gather, it's the different, like I say it in the book about the difference between gathering and foraging for me. When we go to gather, it's, yes, we're going out to gather, but we have already laid the groundwork for the year of stewardship and tending these places where either our foods grow or our weaving materials grow. There's been fire laid on the ground so that everything can grow back better, and people are out there tending it. And in that act of service and our relationship, the act of reciprocity from the land is that we are blessed with these incredible foods and these incredible foodways. So it's more of, what can I do to be in service of this land? And then the land will give us something in return. Whereas I feel like foraging and commercial foraging, it's really, let me go find the place where all these things are growing, get all of them, and then get out of there, right, and go sell them to chefs in San Francisco or wherever. It is very extractive. It's just as extractive as any other industry that's on our land taking things. And I know that those foraging communities really would not put themselves in that category. And they may feel some kind of way about that. But when you really scratch the surface, you'll see that there's really no reciprocity being practiced. And I even talked to somebody recently who is an expert mycologist and had been gathering thousands of pounds of mushrooms for decades, but never in the whole time that he has been going up onto Karuk, Shasta, Klamath lands, has he ever connected with the native people there to offer them any of his gathering, or connected with them in any way. So I would hope that people will see this and then see and read, instead of, feeling alienated by that they'll see that there's ways that they can be in community that are very easy. They're very easy ways to be in community, because being in community is easy. That's the whole point of it. It makes it easier for all of us. So I'm hoping that people will read that and think, oh yeah, I could do that. I can definitely reach out to my local tribal office and see if there are elders that are subsistence gatherers that may need this or want some of this before I go out, or I can check with them and see if it's appropriate for me to go out or volunteer and help. There's many ways to be in community that are very simple. So I really don't want to just say, don't do that. I want to say, look, you have skills. You obviously have skills. And many of us have been disconnected from these land-based skills. So sharing that with our youth and offering classes and taking people out, affording them safety and protection on public lands where native gathering is still criminalized, but non-native foraging is not. So there's ways forward for everybody to work together. So hopefully when people read this, they're ready to start shifting their perspective into this more community-based lens.
The essay you're referencing now is really one of the examples where I really felt your sort of tough love in that essay, and it's a key essay, and hearing you talk about it now even makes it that much more important. And it's also very distinct in how you did not offer a lot of cookbooks that and call for ingredients that might not be what everybody has in their pantry would have a appendix that would tell us where to get them, where to buy them. And you very deliberately do not do that, because that's not what you're saying. You're not saying, oh, you can just, order your spruce tips at, such and such specialty food. You're saying, no, it's not. That's not what it is. It's about going into your community, reaching out to your community, finding where you can engage with what's growing around you. Yeah, it's very interesting, that distinction.
Yeah. And because that is the whole point, is really disrupting a food system and the corporate food system that we're in right now. And in our communities, if our traditional way of being in community is about relationship building, and so a lot of people ask me how much for a pound of acorn flour, and I can't put a price tag on it. It's too much. It would be ridiculous. It's priceless in that way. There's no way to really do that. But yet, if I have my neighbor next door who has chickens and I want to trade for eggs, to me, that's a fair trade, because I know how they take care of the chickens, and I know that they're in relationship with them, and they really care about it. It's their family. And people who have chickens, they're bananas for chickens. So they really have this relationship. So to me, and I'm bananas for acorns. So I feel like that's a fair trade. And that's how we've always been. We are in relationship with the things that we gather. So the relationship is really what we're trading on, as opposed to the cash.
And I guess the result ultimately.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you mentioned with photography, so much learning. The cover is very striking. It's stunning. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So the cover was, again, one of the last pieces, and the bowl itself, I couldn't quite settle on the bowl or how I really wanted to do it. I think it was a native event, and California Native Glass, I believe, is the name of the company. They are Karuk. They had their bowls on display, and I found the bowl that I wanted. And I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. And they showed me some photography that they had done with the bowl, where they had the light shining up from the bottom. So I was like, oh, I got to go take this and try it because that's my dining room table that it's sitting on. And my husband, who I did not give any credit to for this picture, even though he did it himself, I took all the credit for it. Sorry.
Well, you're sharing it now, right? So
I know, but cut that part out. But he worked really hard, and in the same thing where he had to go through this learning curve, he was kind of just doing it like just for fun, just to see and you see how the camera works, and he spent days building this little kind of studio to make the cover just right.
Wow.
Just to get the bowl just right. Well, he ended up with a picture that was incredible. It was better than the cover. It was really wonderful. But this one felt more real to us because it had, I don't know, it just felt like the lighting and everything. I had gathered all that other stuff. So it was really mostly him messing around, trying to figure it out. And then I put the light underneath and it just sort of, I thought it looked really pretty.
It's beautiful, and since this is audio and not visual, and we'll share a picture of the book. But it's a beautiful glass bowl of gathered ingredients. There's right. Not a single thing you could buy in a supermarket here. A quail egg, and there's mushrooms and
Indian lettuces. There's Latonia perfoliata. There's redbud and porcini, morels. Some hedgehog mushrooms, rose hips, nasturtium, some yerba buena tea, Indian tea, looks like some Monterey pine and little pine cones, wood strawberry, maybe some wood sorrel, borage.
Hearing you list all these things, Sara, I'm struck by another choice you made in writing these recipes and writing this book, in that you don't over-explain the ingredients. So there are things that, again, might be unfamiliar for someone, and you just put them out there and you talk about them in a very inclusive way. I love that choice because you're not separating them out. There's not this glossary. There's not you're not othering the ingredients in any way. You're just, here's the 1 cup of acorn flour, the 1 cup of AP flour, the manzanita flour, the various things. And it forces the reader to go on a journey. And I think this notion of a journey comes up again and again, listening to you and reading your book and the organization of the book. It's seasonal. And am I correct that it starts in the fall?
Yes, that's the beginning of our year. The Karuk New Year is in the fall. So.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Again, it's very deliberate, and you do in the introduction to the first chapter, the fall chapter, you say why that's first, but it's not heavy-handed, and it strikes me again and again that you've taken a very light touch in a lot of this, but the overall impact of it is very, very powerful. A lot of these choices, I'm just wondering if your editor at any point said, do you want to have a glossary and say this? And you were like, nah, I don't think so.
We had discussed pretty much every aspect of it. I had to bounce off of them and hear somebody else's, thoughts on it. But I think that we were all very aligned with this. I just wanted to write as if everybody was going to do this. They were all going on this journey. And once you start this journey, then how the book is written makes sense. It makes more sense. Once you're starting on this journey, you start gathering, you start preserving, and you start, engaging in community and understanding this, food sovereignty and food security issues. And these things will make sense. And I wanted people to just maybe see a lot of these different things and maybe one thing that they will recognize, like, oh, I have rose hips in my backyard, or, I know I have that actually, or I do have pine, I have spruce tips, or I do get these things. So maybe just finding the one thing that they can look at and see around them as that touchstone, that connection that starts the whole avalanche.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to know if you have advice for somebody who wants to dig into their heritage and personal story to do a cookbook.
So the best piece of advice that I got about that was, I'm trying to make sure that I say this correctly, but I had been expressing in my writing group that I was feeling so much pressure and so worried about putting this out as a Karuk woman and representing Karuk people. And one of the women said, well, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be representing everybody. This is just how you do it. And it's intimate and it's personal. And this is just how I do it. And I'm sharing this from my home to everybody else's home. So this is just one way of doing this. There is an infinite number of ways to do this. And every family does things differently. And that's how it's always been. We all have different backgrounds, different heritage, and blended families, different blended cultural heritage as well. So you don't have to be representative of any specific individual culture. That it is enough to just be embodying what that means to you and then sharing how you are doing it with other people. And coming at it as an act of generosity and an act of service. And you're really more, I guess I would say, coming at it from a place of service and a place of education and sharing. But don't let that, don't be paralyzed by having to be representative of an entire culture.
Oh, I think that will really resonate with our listeners because you are not alone in those feelings when writing. So, and very cool you had a writing group.
Yeah. It was a writing group full of other Native writers, and especially toward the end, I mean, I couldn't have done it without that support of other Native people, and it was very helpful to me. And even right at the beginning when I was thinking, oh, I can't do this. This is too personal. This is just too scary. I don't want to do it. And one of the members of my writing group, Mark Tilson, he's a Lakota poet. And he said, if not now, when? We don't have time. Do it now. What are you doing? You have to be brave. You have to do this now. It felt really harsh, but it actually, it's something that resonates with me all the time when I'm hesitant or nervous or when I don't want to talk in public. If not now, when? This is my life. This is my lifetime. And this is my opportunity to use my voice. And if I don't do it, then I will just pass through and not have followed my own original instructions to be in service of my community. So his words, even though they did feel kind of saucy at the time, really, I carry it with me in a lot of things that I do.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you talking with us today and giving us this book too. It feels like a gift. Instead of thank you, I think I'll just say yay.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
You can find ways to connect with Sara in our show notes. And she actually emphasized after we were finished recording that if you are struggling with, say, leaching your acorns or some other process as you're working through her book, she'd love to hear from you. So feel free to DM her on Instagram. She can even send you a little video just to help you out because she knows that this is new for a lot of people and can be challenging.
And really underscoring the community aspect of her work. She really wanted us to let everybody know that she's available.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is also available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.